This evening, what we're going to do is, first, you're going to hear from the creator of Sonic Forest. Then we're going to look at it from lots of different angles, the broader context of what Sonic Forest is an example of, talking about public space, public art, and public life. Then we're going to hear from you, and I hope that you're going to be riled up enough to want to engage with the panelists. And then there's going to be some fabulous dessert upstairs. So I hope that's incentive to enjoy what we're doing. The topic is, I was trying to sum up what the topic is, and that is how public art can activate public space and make it a social space, a space for public life. Well, having said that, you might ask some questions like, why does public space need to be activated anyway? And what is public art? And if you know what public art is, what is art? Public life, are we all on stage? Is life just reality TV minus the cameras? And if we're all performers, who's the audience? That's the terrain we'll be talking about tonight. And it's going to begin by having the creator of Sonic Forest start us off. He is an internationally acclaimed artist. His work has appeared throughout the United States and Europe. He was trained as an architect and a jazz musician. Architect and jazz musician. He makes architecture more like music, and he makes music more like architecture. He was trained at Princeton and MIT, and nevertheless has the family good sense to have a son who is an undergraduate here at USC. Please welcome my friend and the creator of Sonic Forest, Christopher Janney.
Thank you, Marty. So, there it was. There it is. Excellent. So I get to talk a little bit about Sonic Forest and projects like Sonic Forest in relation to this bigger subject, public space, public art, public life, singular, Marty. When we started talking about this, which could have even been as much as a year ago, I sent this note to Marty, and I've talked about this idea that architects and landscape architects really have a responsibility to design at the macro scale often, and don't often get down to possibly to the level of smaller communities, but then to the level of the single pedestrian. And I am of the mind that this is an important thing, that spaces should be made for people and for individual people to interact with other individual people. So that the work that I do and the work that I explore is using contemporary technology to try to make these kinds of public spaces literally a social foil, a way for total strangers to possibly interact with one another, if only for a minute, but that also shapes the quality, the character of that space. I talk often about the micro scale and the macro scale, of which I've tried to show examples here. It's an awesome task for any designer to have to think at such broad, two different scales simultaneously, and to get it all the way down to the individual is not often possible. But I want to just now start a little bit and talk about public space. Things that I also thought about when I was thinking about projects like Sonic Forest. Originally, Sonic Forest was a commission from the National Endowment on the Arts to create, I wanted to create something that would plug into an existing plazas, large plazas, and bring some human scale back to it, because I thought that certainly in primitive cultures, in villages, this scale issue wasn't a problem. This village was small enough such that the center of the village, which tended often to be this public space where people would gather for social, back in even then, political issues, discussions, interaction. We sort of lost a lot of that as our cities have gotten big and out of scale in a certain degree. Certainly the things that went on in these public spaces, performances, rituals, things of these natures which help to bring the life, I think, to the village, to the community. These things also, I feel, are a bit lacking, or can be, when we start to make cities so big or we start to make plazas so big, we lose that sense. Certainly, if we move a little farther ahead in the Greeks in the 5th century, you can see still they're talking about having this design here of Athens, the open space in the middle around the buildings, and certainly was there to promote not only the economic conditions but also the democratic, the political conditions. All this was part of a necessary part, I think, of making the kind of social fabric that works at a city scale. Well, we get into the medieval period and it gets pretty dense, pretty crowded, but you can see there's still public space being carved out. And in particular, this piece right here, which is an astronomical clock that is in the city of Prague, and it's been running since the 5th century BC. I just want to tell you that it hasn't been running maintenance-free, but there's actually a person that lives in the clock tower that his responsibility is to make sure the clock works. But in the sense of having a performance piece, and this thing does perform on the hour, in the middle of this plaza all day, it brings people together at a certain period of the day to observe this ritual, and then they go about their business. But in the way that it focuses the energy, the direction on this rather large plaza, I think was an interesting convergence, in my mind, of public space and to me, public art. Certainly, in Rome, I wanted to show these images because here's where we also deal with some very large-scale spaces, and maybe, you know, they're quite obviously beautiful spaces, and I've actually done projects on the Spanish Steps in Rome. But again, to try to when you're not having a big city event or a big religious event, as they would in St. Peter's, the plaza can often feel out of scale. Oh, now this is important was very important to me in my own work, and what happened in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution there in 1917, where it really was the idea of artists wanting to take over and bring art into the street, art into life, the whole development of what is now called agit-prop, agitation propaganda. Really the way that art played a very important role in the street and changing the street culture was a very important part to me in thinking about my work, which really is obviously not as overtly political, but it is the idea of putting art in the street in the middle of your everyday life so that you have some kind of, potentially some kind of aesthetic experience on your way to work. It's not something where you just go to a theater or a museum to have a specific experience, but it happens as part of your daily life. So now we come to the Modernist Condition, which was really the incentive for me to create a project like Sonic Forest and similar projects. This is, I come from Boston, Massachusetts, so this is a condition that I'm quite aware of, where you see down here the Red Sox, the year they won the pennant. It's not this year, we know that, but it's really fine when you have a place to gather 10,000 people. But on the other 364 days, what do you have? You have a very bleak, overscaled kind of plaza, kind of condition. And Sonic Forest was really this idea, well, can we make something, even that's a temporary installation, that can be put in and pulled out, so that at the times when it's not being able to be there for 10,000 people, it can then have a different kind of scale and a different kind of quality. Another modernist plaza, just to give an example of how the modern architects, early modernist architects, in my mind, got to the idea, well, you know, I need to have a plaza around my beautiful building so I can keep other buildings away. And while we're at it, let's go have some sculpture of some sort to put on this plaza. Not always at the choice of the public. But nevertheless, we need large spaces to have large public events. whether they're events that are hosted by the city, or in this case, where the people just rise up and they say, 11,000 of us want to dance to Thriller in Mexico City, so give us a space to do it. So there are reasons to have large spaces in the cities, but the question in my mind, is there a way that those spaces can also be flexible and be able to expand and contract? This to me is a great example. Times Square, one of the great public spaces in my mind. Certainly a space that's wanted for so long in my mind to be more public. And the fascinating thing there in the lower right, in the last 2 or 3 months, they actually closed the street and have turned it into a pedestrian park. And you see all these nice people sitting in green chairs. They literally, you now can go and sit in Times Square and just enjoy it at the pedestrian scale, if you will, that it can be. Even the naked cowboy there in the upper left, he's still there entertaining. But also, in a condition like this, there's room to make public art. And there is a program in New York where artists are able to actually interface with the commercial media that's there and make artwork that is really in the middle of this pretty intense public space. Another public space that I've often been very impressed with, and I think is very much a good example of how public spaces can work, is the Millennium Park in Chicago. Not only from the concert hall there in the upper left, but of course this very interesting water fountain and Anish Kapoor's piece and other artworks. But that brings us also to Los Angeles, and certainly there's some really interesting projects that have been developed here. Nokia Plaza is one good example, dealing both with the macro and the micro. I think it's a pretty interesting solution, and I hope that we'll be talking about that tonight. Also, the Grand Intervention proposal, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure, but it is this idea of a public space where literally the public pushed their way in, if I may say, and said, we want to have a voice. And it was certainly with the help of some very important people, but it really was a way to try to help the public come and be part of the process, part of the design process. But I can't talk about public space in the Millennium without talking about the digital world, and we have people with us tonight who are hopefully going to speak to that, who are quite expert at it. But it's quite clear that with the advent of the electronic revolution, the information revolution, that the whole notion of public space, private space, is completely eroded. That the digital world, you have people wearing iPods in the middle of a subway train, a public space, but they are clearly in their own private world. You have video gaming where people are playing games with people all over the world. And this whole idea of McLuhan's global village, I posed the question to the group, if there's a global village, where's the global public space? And I think playing the video games has maybe gone too far, but I'm not of that generation, so I can't really speak to that. The other side of the media revolution is really the virtual public space. And again, we have people on the panel who also can talk more about this, and I hope will. But the whole idea that it's not about physical space anymore. It's about this virtual space, and is there a virtual public space that is sort of taking the place of our traditional public spaces. So, I predict that in the future, Mr. Dick Wolf will design a single public space in the virtual world for every possible criminal event. I mean, he's doing it already, but it will be titled Public Square, and it stars this man. Thank you very much. Onward. Oh, I sit.
I'd like at this point to invite the panelists to come on the stage, and I'm going to introduce them. Come on all together, and I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until I have introduced them all, and then you can all welcome them as a group, please. So you've met Chris Janney. Robert Kraft is a songwriter, film music composer, recording artist, record producer, and in those capacities he has been nominated, he and project he's worked on have been nominated for an Academy Award, Grammy Awards, Golden Globe Awards. He's worked, just to pick a few examples, on the soundtracks of The Little Mermaid, Titanic, Juno, and the Muppets' Christmas Carol. He has been, for the last 15 years, chief executive and then president of Fox Music. Fox Music, an enormous enterprise. He sits at the top of it. Sitting next to him is Anne Bray. She is an artist, a teacher, and she's the founding director of something that, if you don't know, you should know about, called Free Waves, which is a decentralized video and new media festival in Los Angeles. She's exhibited her own art, just to give you a sense of what it means to be decentralized. She's exhibited her own art at gas stations and malls, movie theaters, on television, in department stores, on billboards, and at art venues. And she teaches public art here at USC. Ted Tanner is an architect who is also an urban designer and an executive at AEG, Real Estate Development, which is the entity that created LA Live. LA Live and the Nokia Plaza, part of it, adjacent to the Staples Center. Have you all been there? Do you pass by or seen it? Yeah. Okay. 40 acres. Ted did the master plan and then got it all made, and it's still being made. It includes 3 clubs, 12 restaurants, the Grammy Museum, which more people should go see. Maybe we'll talk about that. A theater, a 1,001-room convention headquarters destination. Dean Qingyun Ma, the dean of the USC School of Architecture. He is an architect who has had his work exhibited all over the world and has work around the world. He founded a Shanghai firm called MADA, do you say MADA? Spam, S-P-A-M. Do you say MADA, S-P-A-M? MADA Spam. It's not the spam you're thinking about. It stands for Strategy, Planning, Architecture, and Media. Interesting combination. His works include the Longyang Residential Complex in Shanghai and the Silk Tower in Xi'an. And USC is extremely fortunate to have someone as distinguished as he is as the Dean of the School of Architecture. Next to him, another colleague at USC, Scott Fischer, is a media artist and interaction designer. He creates and studies interactive environments and the technologies of presence. Presence, something we'll be talking about, and interactivity. He has worked with NASA, Atari, Paramount. He has his own companies called Telepresence, and he is a professor at the School of Cinematic Arts and chair of the Interactive Media Division. Please welcome this panel. So, on one of your slides, Chris, you had the word boundaries and talked about the ways in which boundaries are blurring. And what I'd like to do is maybe start the conversation talking about boundaries and do they exist anymore? And what are the reasons these boundaries are changing? And so I have a question for each of you. So I'm going to ask these questions of each of you, and then at a certain point you're going to lose patience listening to each other, and you're going to want to jump in, and I'll keep asking more questions, and a free-flowing conversation will ensue, and then you will guarantee its liveliness by joining in. So I'm going to start by asking Dean Ma a question about boundaries. I was reading some of the material that you've written and that's been written about you. And what's astonishing, just as in the name SPAM, which includes architecture and media, two things, you know, where do they come together? It was described that you work on architecture within the stream of mass communication. We think of mass communication as one thing, architecture as another thing. What does that mean?
Well, architecture definitely is a physical object in the end. That's what we deliver to the society. But its role that playing in the society is much more than the physical object. It actually has messages, has all intentions, desires, both from the community of architects and from the community of users or spectators. So particularly in our office, the work that's always been strategized through media operation and how is actually, before it's even formulated in any physical way, it's already expressed to the public. What is it going to be about through really a tremendous amount of media participation, both in political realm and also in commercial realm. Obviously, other critiques of architecture would criticize our work as being not purely academic or rigorous as what architectural discourse would expect. But that's, for us, is the only way that architecture could actually serve a better role in the society. As you probably all know, architects these days are probably the most frustrated, miserable professionals on the street. And I guess the reason...
I think journalists might think they compete with that. That's okay.
Yeah, the reason it became this is because they didn't realize architecture has a large role in participating in non-physical context of society, cities and agriculture, or all communities. I would put out this for more reflections.
A performative environment is another phrase.
Right.
That. In what sense is architecture in a performative environment?
It's a process that's very it's informative to start with, but immediately has to get feedback from the context that's physical or social. So that process is very important. Being a physical kind of business or enterprise, it hasn't got there yet, but performative environment is a goal that architecture as a discipline is addressing or understanding and hopefully creating.
And you're talking about that not just in the design process, but once the thing is built, that it remains in a participatory, performative environment.
Precisely so, precisely.
Chris, did you want to get in on that?
The performative environment, does it have a physical form? Or is this part of the process that leads you to the physical manifestation?
It actually started with physical context because it has a lot to do with what we understand as environment. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the trend today is to reduce environment into measurable bits and measurable agents and measuring its environmental performance. Mm-hmm. But that's where the whole debate is started. But in the end, it has to end up with what you were, it's a social performance mm-hmm. that architecture plays.
Mm-hmm. So the boundary we've been talking about is a thing and a process. A thing is also a process. And electrons are waves and particles. Scott, I want to ask you about a different boundary and boundary crossing. And that's reality and, I don't know, you could call it virtual reality, hyper-reality, surreality. What is the distinction, if any, between the world we live in and the world that we experience through technology? Has it all come together?
Oh, please don't call it virtual reality, at least.
It was a set.
Okay. I mean, I think the way we've been approaching this is looking at this kind of layer of virtuality, of information, of data that's been kind of accreting around our physical environment, around ourselves, around just about everything we do. And I think what we've been trying to do is visualize that, give people some way to both enter into it, to interact with it, to use it in ways that haven't really been possible until just recently. So I think, as you mentioned, I've been interested in this idea of presence and particularly telepresence. How do you mediate that experience?
What is presence for people who are not familiar with the term?
So simply a sense of being in a particular place. So telepresence.
Whether or not you're there.
Well, even if you're there, I would argue that in our current environment, you often don't have a strong sense of presence, that you're really swapping in and out of that. You're sort of a wide spectrum of being very present and very aware of what's going on, but then also kind of withdrawing and sort of off into other kind of virtual spaces, as you brought up. And I think what we've been trying to do is figure out, how do you mediate that? How do you augment presence using technology? I think in an interesting way that Chris has done also with this installation tonight, this week, and in a lot of his other work. So often when I talk about the virtual environment stuff that we do, people just totally get very upset about this technology that's between you and the natural world. I argue that it's actually a very good way to increase your environmental awareness. It's a way to give you a better sense of context. There are ways that we can do this now. It's kind of like carrying a field guide. I don't know if any of you are hikers or interested in sort of being out in a natural space. Often you have a kind of guide to help you understand what's around you. What we've been trying to do is figure out ways to do that with what we call augmented reality or mixed reality, of superimposing graphics onto that physical space. Back to this idea of telepresence and teleexistence, which there's so many words for it now, it's kind of confusing, but it seems to me that that kind of technology and that kind of augmentation can help better visualize and make you feel more connected with the world around you.
With the non-technological world around you.
Yes. And I, again, would argue that I think Chris, I'm trying to bring him on board here, so I'm not the only techno geek on the panel, that what he's doing is also kind of helping us pay attention to kind of natural sounds around us, and I thought the Cage quote that he opened with tonight was especially appropriate.
So that's another boundary, the world as experienced with and without the mediation of technology. Robbie, we were talking the other day about Marcel Duchamp, French artist, 1917. He took a urinal and he called it a fountain and sent it to an exhibition and created something of a firestorm. So, and that's of interest to you. The question I'd like to have you play with is, what's the difference between art and not art?
You just answered it.
Well, humor me.
Is signing a urinal, does anybody know what he signed the urinal?
R. Mutt.
Thank you. He signed the urinal R. Mutt. It was an alias. And I always liked it because in the last 100 years, I'm not sure anyone has asked the question any better, which is, why wouldn't that be a legitimate entry into a museum or a artistic exhibition? Shortly thereafter, he put a snow shovel in a museum and called it In Advance of a Broken Arm. But I think it simply asks the question, which may be pertinent here, which is there some need to define what we are all doing as art Does that separate it? Is that a further removal? And when you go into the men's room and you look at a urinal, is that an exhibition of fabulous artwork, or is it just a men's room?
So before Chris, so is the interrogation as far as anyone can get, or is there actually a set of hypotheses or possible answers to that question? Or is it only the endless questioning? That's for you, Rob.
Dude.
I say for Chris.
No, I'm sorry. He wanted to interrupt. I just wanted to push it just one step farther.
Is it only endless questions?
So Duchamp asks the question,
right.
What is art? Who is to say what is art? Is all there is, then, just the asking of the question, so that all art, in some ways, since then, becomes about the question of what is art?
I think you're actually poking into an area that's very good for this group, which is
God, I hope
this
so.
kind of, is there a theoretical and cerebral thing that we all have to do that defines it as art, or is there something public and universal and available to everyone, or do you have to think about it and define it and go into fancy, intellectual debate situation? Or what Chris is doing is saying, hey, if you're walking on a street and you see this kind of cool thing, do you have to distinguish it as art? Is it just an experience for a minute of joy and difference? Or do we have to start, writing books about it to make sure that we know whether it is or not? I think that's, when I said you answered the question, that was always the great joy I found in Duchamp, is that he didn't say, let me write a lot about this and think about it and define it. He just made it one gesture which answered everything, which is, I don't know, it's kind of funky and funny and subversive, and you decide. But I think what Chris is doing, and it sounds like you're looking at also just the whole nature of, I guess as a musician, I've always been very allergic to overthinking. So I think that there's a great ability here to think about some kind of boundary for this stuff and conversation, but it's also one thing that never gets said in those is, isn't it all about feeling in some ways too, an emotional response? So I like to not overthink it.
Chris, you wanted to get in on that?
That was a long time ago. But
well, share your feelings.
Well, no, the point, I just want to speak for a moment about the urinal, because you have to know that he turned the urinal upside down.
Correct.
Okay? And in doing so, he basically contradicted the utility of the urinal. It could no longer be a urinal. He stuck a bicycle wheel in a stool. So it could no longer be a bicycle wheel and it could no longer be a stool. He gave a new idea to this previously understood utility. So it isn't that he just picked the urinal. I mean, there was a whole subversive side to this story, which we don't have to go into, but it isn't that he just picked the urinal and said, here it is. He did something to the object that rendered it no longer the utility that it could be, and therefore elevated it to another plane. And this is how he talks about his ready-mades, and this is in very much why he's considered to be the father of conceptual art. It's not about the making of the object, it's about the perception of what you might do to the object to just shift your idea of what that object might become. So I think that also your reference to running into Sonic Forest is correct, because for me it is about feeling, and there's a lot of thought that went into it, but it's not to be those who want to think about it are free to think about it, but those who want to also just experience it, which also comes from being a musician, I mean, it's Charlie Parker, when somebody said, a student asked, should I go to music school so that I can become a great musician? He said, yes. You should go to music school, learn everything you know, and then forget that shit and play. okay? And he meant it. At a certain point, you got.
That's not true of architecture school, is it?
No, but it actually is, okay? But I mean, at some point, you have to let it go and be who you are. And I also think that's part of all of us having and thinking about aesthetic experiences. It's still got to come from this place of the unknown, of the soul. So much for that.
You, in Free Waves and personally, place art in places that it's often not seen. And I'm wondering what that does to the traditional boundaries between the artist, the curator, the critic, and the audience. We have those boxes. We kind of think we know what that means. But when you put stuff in shopping malls and on billboards, that stuff gets contested, doesn't it?
Right, I just did the one on Hollywood Boulevard this last year, and it was really a struggle to put it there. So there were maybe 50 stores up and down the boulevard that it took me 2 entire summers of going door to door to convince them. Actually, I told all the artists that's where we were showing them, and they all agreed. But I wouldn't say the artists were really thrilled to be showing at tattoo parlors and taco restaurants, etc. The other is that the critics come in beforehand and they are like sort of, oh, this exciting thing is happening, but then they don't take it very seriously. They don't write a art form review of it. And then the audiences come by and they are confused, and the ads sort of dominate the space, and so it's hard to have other visual material in advertising space. But I do feel like that by having it in this familiar context, that they all walk in the door, they understand the frame, and then I use that store or billboard, etc., to surround this very unfamiliar artwork that I show only experimental video, and we put it in these very ordinary places. That it's really trying to frame it in normalcy so that you can transition your way into wherever this art piece is. So really choose which artwork goes in which location, and that context that you were talking about here is trying to help the audience transition from being the unknown to the known, and like that it's a sliding experience. That I feel like if you go into a museum and it's declared what you're going to be seeing is art, that I have this reverence and distance and alienation, and that what I try to do is to bridge that, and then have and when I'm in this middle of the street and talking to whoever, I don't call it art. People, what is it? And I say, oh, it's something to look at. You know, it's something to play with. I just use any other word, and they just dive into it. And if I say that it's art, they're like, I gotta go now. And
do people experience the place, the unusual place that you put the art differently because not the art, the plaything is there? Does that make the place different to them?
I think then we're back to the title of this event. To me, what we're doing through this is creating public space, because otherwise this defined, usually commercial space where my only interaction is to pay for something, walk down the street in this public, 6 feet of cement, and that I want the exchange or a new idea, or it's sort of like how can can we collectively come to new decisions that we've never made? Like we were talking about healthcare. Like how are we deciding healthcare right now? And like what are our methods for negotiating among ourselves? And so any new idea, I think it actually comes from a new perception, and I think the art world deals in perception.
So you just gave me a cue to ask Ted a question, which is about the relationships, contrasts and similarities between public space and commercial space. Are there distinctions? The place where Sonic Forest is called Han Plaza. So Han Plaza, Nokia Plaza. Is there a distinction or not?
I think you could clearly appreciate Nokia Plaza as a commercial space. We have always seen it as another venue, a gathering place that can be a multitasking vessel for people to interact, whether it's the community gathering to see President Obama's inauguration, or the funniest thing I saw 2 weekends ago was the end of the triathlon, and there must have been 50 tables of people getting very public massages after the marathon. But I think we've worked harder to make it a more public place, and not to have it just read with all the district sponsors that, of course, have helped pay for the improvements that make the space. We've, I think, activated it almost to a sensory bombardment level with media, with signage, with light. And we feel that's an important thing to do in Los Angeles, to create a center of light and energy, and not only for people who are passing through to see a Laker game or a concert at Nokia Theatre or the Star Wars show we had for families just a few days ago, but to actually have that be a venue, a place to come. And we've actually had USC students display their animation film on our towers. And I'd love to see us do more of that. I'd love to hire Chris to do something and really transform that space into a public art experience, which I think it can easily be. So I think the structure, the bones are there. It's a very flexible environment. We've worked hard to give it scale. We've also worked hard to set our buildings back a little bit further off of the streets. It's not just the acre square, it's the street that crosses through it that we can close down. It's the edges around it, the paseos that lead into it, and we've tried to activate all of those with people places, outdoor dining, places to sit, some trees to sit under, and these big towers that are holding all this infrastructure of technology. So it's still a work in progress, I think, but I would love to see it do more and be much more of a public gathering point.
Would you consider putting lawn chairs there?
Sure, absolutely.
Our own Times Square version?
Yeah.
How about the naked cowboy?
Not so sure about that.
So, Chris, you've been listening to this and occasionally jumping in. I'm going to invite you now to jump in with both feet. Is there some aspect of what you've heard that you want to underline, agree with, or disagree with, or would you prefer a question from the behind the door?
Well, I'll take the door.
Okay. One of the themes that runs through all the stuff that I've read about your work is the idea that your art, your public art, enables strangers to play with each other. People who don't know each other to have an intimacy as a consequence of being around that art. So one of the questions I have, and it's provoked in part by those pictures of Boston, of those immense plazas, and people are like ants. What's your view of what the modern condition is? Are we all lonely strangers needing public art in order to connect with each other?
Now, I would say it's not a new concept, the concept of what's called urban alienation. And it's a term that I've always been interested in. And the theory is that, and, you know, I spoke to some degree, that back when the community was small enough that people could relate to one another, even on the street, and even knew one another, maybe not everyone, but the scale of the city or the scale of the place allowed for social interaction to happen. Once cities got to a certain size, this became, and I think there, you know, there are many other reasons, but to a certain degree, this became very difficult. There's just too many people. You wouldn't know where to start. So I've always tried to say that, you know, one of the things I try to do with my work is to chip away at the urban alienation, to try to make structures that allow for people, even crowds of people, to interact with one another, beginning at a one-on-one. I mean, Sonic Forest is 16 columns, but it's also 16 individual 16 individual interactive places. So it's a condition where, you know, 1, 2, or 60 people can interact. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to, but it is a structure. It's a, and I think I try to think of it as a proactive structure that allows for this kind of condition to possibly occur. Another piece of mine that's a permanent piece in the New York City subway called Reach is on a subway platform, and you reach up and you wave your hand and you basically break the photoelectric sensor, and it triggers sounds of natural environments. Now, what I think makes that very interesting is that you're in a New York City subway, you're already slightly anxious. You're underground. You know, New York's a pretty intense place. You're holding pretty tight to your purse or your wallet or whatever you have. So there's already an energy there to push against. I mean, that piece would not work for me out in a forest. So you have to think about the public condition, the condition of the public space, where it is, and try to also use that as part of the piece to create what I have said earlier called a social foil.
Scott, I'm going to come over here just to make the cameraman crazy and make sure I don't get a crick in my neck. The new school of cinematic arts is technologically interesting. And you were describing ways in which it has embedded in it aspects of storytelling.
We've been working for the last year to try to take this new building that we moved in January and turn it into a character that can tell stories. And the way we've done that is to embed thousands of rich media files into the structure of the building itself. And you interact with the building using your mobile phone. There's an iPhone application that everybody in the building can use to develop a relationship with the building. So when I say character, I don't mean something like HAL in 2001, so this kind of omniscient, horrible red-eyed kind of tracking everything you do and making life difficult. What we're trying to do is have people become more aware of the life of the building, make it more transparent. The building has a Twitter stream, so it's basically twittering about the several thousand sensors that are in the foundation, in the HVAC. I mean, all the environmental data that basically a building runs with. We've built some furniture that lives in the building that actually has documentation, video footage embedded in it of it being built, of the MGM studios where the wood came from originally, where Wizard of Oz was shot. And the building basically dreams this stuff out over Bluetooth. So you can, again, pick up these images with your phone. The building sends you on missions to take photographs of itself, to learn about other parts of Los Angeles and other buildings. It's particularly interested in movies where buildings get blown up, which it doesn't really understand. is horrified by. Anyway, I could go on and on. It's designed at this point where when you go into the building, you use the iPhone app, the building will ask you to help it learn about certain films and so on. So for us, this is really about context, about, as I said, transparency, having a better sense of your environment, and having the building then be able to support that, since it knows we have pedometers in this thing, we know kind of where all the activity is concentrated in the building and so on. So I think it's an interesting step it's a challenge to get people to kind of play with the building in this sense and treat it like another entity. But once you kind of give into that, it's has a really interesting kind of relationship that develops. I would tie it back to what Chris was saying about this large plaza in Boston. I lived a couple blocks away from there, City Hall, for many years, and I mean, I was kind of horrified by that open space too for a while, but now I see it as a tremendous opportunity to embed all this virtual stuff. I mean, you could use the space to do all these virtual art installations. We've done a installation in Japan in a public space where everybody could mail images and poems and haiku and anecdotes to a wide open space very much like that. But you don't see it when you go there until you use either a device like this or a headset that we built to kind of make that invisible space visible to you. So I think, again, back to boundaries and context, there's kind of a wonderful opportunity there to kind of populate that space with other kinds of information, not just physical architecture, but virtual architecture.
But there's also a slight danger here, because with all the digital capabilities, all of a sudden we can expect some very mediocre and bad buildings can all of a sudden respond to our environment and help us understand more. That actually would then disable architecture as discipline and create better buildings. That actually itself means something to the environment. See, that's why we choose to work together more. It's because a building itself must be public art to start with. It should not be only an enabler of public arts. That's where I think at school we take piece of building as public itself. A second point of public art has also a slight risk there, because immediately when you label it public art, there is a tendency that you kind of bestow or actually reduce the level of art so that the public can be easily accessed to it, immediately kill the quality of art as well. I do think art has to be kept in the realm that explored by the general public rather than being given to the public, because it's too much public debate has been this accessibility of public. What I'm impressed by Chris' work is actually remain to be highly sophisticated, highly entertaining simultaneously, because there is this intense curiosity that's immediately built in. I think that's the quality. It can be just given as art to a public, says this is art, please take it. And there are so many failures in public art project that has kind of risk in that. Just want to add to. I'm
glad you did. And Anne, you wanted to add something.
I was just thinking of that. To me, the differences of what we're talking about of advertising and art and multimedia and virtual reality is this relation with the audience and this potential viewers, and the degree of respect or disrespect or assumptions about them and I feel like it's really changing right now. And the thing of Scott talking about having everyone mail in or email their art to his system, right? Or to having us play with it, or to having, you know, selecting the art and putting it out in public, that there's this wide range that's developing right at the moment of the maker, who is the maker, who is the receiver, who's the critic, who's the curator, and that it's really blurring.
Robbie, when you work on the scores and soundtracks for movies, is there an artist there, or is it all the consequence of lots of different players and lots of different issues of intellectual property and how much something costs and whether the director agrees with the music supervisor? Where in all that is the art?
Well, it's an interesting rebalancing of this entire equation. I mean, it's curious to think, are The Simpsons public art? You have 20 million people watching every Sunday night. You know, here you wonder, for free. I guess the cost of a television set.
Well,
so
is American Idol public art?
It would be into the same category. If the medium is the message, then it's just whatever's coming off your tube.
I'd be picking The Simpsons.
Well,
but the larger question is a mediated entertainment experience.
Right. In other words, if you started to define, you know, is Juno more artistic than Big Mama's House 2? You know, you're going to the same space to watch both of them. They both take the same amount of time, and varying degrees of human beings get equal amounts of joy from either one. So to start shredding the difference between commercial art and in a public space too. So, I mean, there's a, you know, it might be something that's all determined and it's not user gen, which some of what we're talking about is, but to answer your question, as you know full well, yes and no. I spent today with James Horner working on Avatar.
A great composer.
And Jim Cameron and James Horner working today on with a 100-piece orchestra. The question would be, are there artists in the room? I'd say those are two fairly significant technological, visual, compositional artists. On the other hand, what they're doing is paid for by an enormous media corporation that needs a product that satisfies a whole lot of demands to be commercially viable, to make back the enormous amount of money that it costs to have those two guys sitting there. So, but again, it's a rebalancing of the same equation, because it's interesting today to see this on a university campus, which might have a certain amount of flexibility, and yet you find out it has to be permitted at a huge level, and to make something, there's always, maybe not with a painter in his studio, maybe not with a solo guitar player, but there's usually a committee somewhere, and there's usually a capitalist event going on somewhere. So, of course, Hollywood and filmmaking and American Idol and all that are the easy targets, but they're not a whole lot different for me than any kind of media that's made because it takes resources to make it. You know, it's always that difference of, oh, Britney Spears sucks, but I really love this avant-garde. Well, wait a minute, they're both on the same silver disc. And Universal Records is probably behind both of them at some level, but this guy never sold out. I'm sorry, he's just a little more dissonant than this shit over here. But it's still, they're just commercial product. So there's this, you know, that's again, it comes back to the same thing of rebalancing this equation, and I'm the first to say that the commercial media universe is the far end of the spectrum of thinking about these issues, but they're not horribly different, they're just more blatant.
Did you want to add something, Dima?
Well, that could lead into the real essence of debate of public versus private. Is there actually a boundary? And why? And I find that from China, I find the debate of public space is really strange in a couple of years ago, because in that society there's no public and private distinction at all. So there's really no debate of what public means, because the political realm goes, everything belongs to everybody else. So this ownership of space and property and the purpose behind it, it's all, so somehow that has to expand into other cultural debate regarding private and public.
Right. It's not just commercial and non-commercial. You have to interrogate what the notion of public is in one society versus another.
Totally. If some audience of yours have experiences in China, Japan, or Korea, you see older people do ballroom dancing underneath highway, and you see the sky kites flying in Tiananmen Square. You basically, there's no boundary of where public and private starts and end. So in a way, then the purpose behind it is always the same. Here, maybe the commercial and capitalistic equation works, but there is the political agenda or the social program actually works into it. It's actually behind what we are used to debate. There's always something that actually runs through the whole course.
Well, and I was just in Rome, and the Vatican wouldn't be there, and St. Peter's Square wouldn't be there without a huge religious agenda and a huge ego and narcissistic agenda of the builders. That wasn't built out of the goodness of someone's heart. That was built as various popes wanted to outdo the pope before and build this space that proved his ability, and he wanted to get Michelangelo. It seems there's always an agenda with these human beings. I keep finding that out.
So, Ted, who is the Pope of Nokia Plaza?
Wow.
Philip Anschutz.
There you go. Well, absolutely. It starts there with the ownership of our company. And it's the vision of many people that created the buildings that really then create the spaces in between them. But getting to this public-private realm, certainly when you buy a ticket, you're in the private realm. I think what we've tried to achieve there is the mixing of and the blurring of that public-private space, whether it's the terraces of Lucky Strike looking down on the people coming out of the parking garage, or it's just the workers that are sitting in the plaza for lunchtime, watching a musician play. Those to me are the ways that we engage with one another in space. And yes, it's fun to be around the vibe of a Laker crowd or even a Kings crowd today. We're winning for a change, but I just think it's important to take these vessels, these places, and try to open them up more to public experience. And that's certainly on our agenda. We designed it with that in mind, that it can expand or shrink to accommodate the larger or the smaller group of people. I think the media opportunities with those 6 tall towers and all the things that we can do from a media standpoint give that space some extraordinary capabilities that we haven't even thought about yet, whether it's broadcasting and sound and light and on, or occupying those with art pieces, or cabling across them and suspending things and creating more definition to that space.
Did you want to add something, Dima?
I wanted to ask a question. Do you feel like all of Los Angeles is your audience, or are there certain sectors of Los Angeles that you're attracting?
Well, I think it should be all of Los Angeles, but we have absolutely those that have paid for a ticketed event, and we have multiple scaled venues that host a variety of performances, live performances. We think it is a content campus for all Los Angelinos to share. It's how do we begin to build that back up into a more public way, so the local downtown residents, the workforce, the people who are in and around LA Live, and I see Gilda in the audience and wonder about what more we could be doing with our community of neighbors both to the south and to the west. And whether it's hosting a graduation for the 10th Street Elementary School on the Laker floor at Staples Center, and then doing something outside in the plaza to celebrate that. Those are the ways we tap into the community that's around us.
Scott, you want to add something?
I wanted to ask Ted if he could mention or describe the Nokia Piece where people could leave messages.
Yeah, we have, we're blessed in both our LA and London projects with some really forward-thinking corporate sponsors, Nokia in particular, a Finland-based company looking to obviously sell handheld devices, has labeled both, well, three things: the Nokia Theatre, the Nokia Plaza, and Club Nokia. And in the and it paid dearly for that. Thank you.
And that's before product placement.
It's before. Well, it included product placement, but in Nokia Theatre, you can actually, or the club rather, you can go into the club and you stand on a number of stations with your Nokia handheld device, and you can record a moment that you have experienced inside the club and stream it onto the club's permanent history, and then come back in 6 months and go back to that and download that experience and that of others, maybe for that same show. And in a way, it really is an engagement far beyond what we would have done. It's Nokia bringing their own ideas about how to reach a public that demands those kinds of experiences and is willing to play an important role in it. Without the public participation in that wouldn't work at all.
A reporter for a USC publication was asking me about Sonic Forest, and I was enthusing and saying it's just great. It's a way of activating public space, and I did not find the you go guy response that I expected. Her reaction instead was, well, does this mean that every place is going to be Las Vegas? Is everything a theme park? Which leads me to ask a question, and this is for anybody, and this is something that we look at the Lear Center. Is everything entertainment, or is there even a relevant distinction between entertainment, art, and just the experience of modern life? Does it matter? Do those distinctions matter? Clearly, for someone who says in horror it's going to be Las Vegas, is worrying about what's happening to the culture. Anyone want to take any aspect of that? Yeah.
I would respond. That I think I go back to this relationship with the audience. Like, to me,
which reminds me that this audience is going to get a chance to ask questions. There are mics at both sides.
Right. Is it what kind of relationship with that audience? Are you informing them? Are you asking them questions? Are you telling them information? Are you asking for their input? Like, each of those is a relationship, and each of them is different, and it's sort of implied in all the work we've been talking about.
So what's the relationship with an audience in entertainment that might be different, say, from the art relationship?
For me, it's an inverse relationship. That for me, and sort of your question, that entertainment is top down, and it's sort of telling you this is funny, this is good, or this is sad, or whatever. And I think a lot of art is saying, what do you think this is? And it's posing a question, and it's putting out some various elements, no matter, depending on the genre, but it's just saying, what do you think about this? And the person has to put the connection together and say what it is. And it's with that link, the circuit gets closed through their thought pattern.
And the question that the artist is assumed to post is actually through a very personal journey. It never meant to be actually, as the artist would put in the process of working, never meant to be shared, actually. The more it's intended not to share, the higher the quality to be shared it is. So there is an abstract boundary between the creative process and the receptive process. I mean, that's actually must be kept very clearly guarded, actually, as old-fashioned, as we're in the context of breaking the boundary. But actually, many times, architects were creating boundaries.
That art is what we don't
say. We build walls, so our business is actually creating boundaries.
Chris, in something of yours that I read in Architecture of the Air, a lovely volume which is available on Amazon, which is a catalog of Chris's work, you talk about being a participant and being an observer, being in a kind of creative spell and the critical outsider point of view. Talk about that in terms of what we were just hearing about what it means to make art.
Well, hold on, no. What I said that you cannot be both a participant and an observer. I mean, I was really referring to the Heisenberg principle from physics, but I was applying it towards my experience of working with creativity, that to actually be in the place of the musician where you're really just feeling it, improvising. You're not thinking about it. You're in the bubble, you're in the moment, and you're just letting go. As opposed to the critic, which plays an important role. I don't, by all means, I mean, both roles have important places, as opposed to the critic or the moment when later or you were able to look back at it, reflect, and think about it. But if you, in my experience, if you try to reflect on it while you're trying to do it, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. I mean, that's also part of just the creative process. So that's what that was in relation to. The issue here about entertainment versus art, you know, I guess that, you know, Marty, your definition of entertainment, I believe, it has that it can be anything, and that within your definition there are artistic possibilities. Now, I think it's so broad that I'm not sure, you know, I do make the distinction between entertainment and art, but that's probably because of what I do for my life. And for me, something, a urinal upside down on a sidewalk, I'd probably walk right by it, even if it said R mud. Okay? But in 1917, under the certain social, political, and economic conditions, under the zeitgeist of what was happening at that time, that particular gesture captured a moment of what the culture was about. And that, to me, is what art can do and can be about. You know, it is a reflection of that moment. But that moment happening at any other time, that urinal would just be a urinal. Okay? So I'm not sure that entertainment, for me, fulfills all those aspects of social, political, and cultural. You know, entertainment for me is like, it's about 1 in the morning and I can't go to sleep, so I'm just going to watch this movie and hopefully I'll end up asleep.
Well, that's ambient.
Yeah. I'm just saying, you know, there are times when I just want the entertainment just to come at me. You know, I don't really want to think.
Well, for the record, my definition of entertainment is not it's everything. Entertainment, I believe, is the capturing and holding of attention. That's the root meaning of entertainment. And yes, everybody that a Wall Street analyst would call someone who works in the entertainment sector, whether it's movies or television or music and so on, they are first and foremost trying to capture and hold attention. They use different techniques and they do it toward different ends, but they share that in common. But if you go with me that far, I'd invite you to go with me just a little bit farther and ask, well, when Frank Gehry designed Bilbao, isn't that a way of capturing attention and holding it, a spectacle, in order to get the eyeballs of the world on it? Isn't a professor in the front of the room desperate for the attention of the room and sometimes does things which are not strictly academic, but which are done in order to hold on to that entertainment, to that attention? And I would contend that the impact of living in an attention economy on every domain is sometimes good and sometimes bad. Look at the way in which, I'll use a terrible word, entertainmentized. Look at the way in which journalism has been entertainmentized. Look at the way politics has become a branch of the entertainment business. These are not entirely good things, but as people are looking at the business model for journalism, they are coming to grips with the fact that there needs to be a business model in which people want the stuff. It's not just broccoli that's good for democracy that journalists are putting out. They also have to, in some way, get people to be interested. So the challenge of journalism in that context is to make the important interesting, to make important and weighty civic and public things, things that can also capture the attention in an attention economy. I saw at least one hand out here.
Well, just if you would, you've defined entertainment quite well. Could you define what you think art is?
I think people who use, who want to get attention and use certain materials. So, for example, Duchamp and Warhol and so much of art that followed Duchamp is all about asking the question, if you pay art attention to me, am I art? If something is in a gallery, Warhol puts a box of Brillo in a gallery, that requires and triggers a certain kind of attention paid to it. Does that mean that that's art or not? So art, I think, in the 20th century and beyond is about getting attention and asking, what is it that makes something art? You know, when we think of religious art now as art in a museum, we've changed the categories of attention we pay to it. So I would say it's the intention of getting attention that constitutes art. And it can be high art and it can be low art. They're both about trying to hold on to people's focus. There were questions. I saw at least one hand. Yes, could you come over to the mic since we're recording? Thank you. And I realize that's highly inadequate, and I would love to tell you to tell me in which that completely doesn't hold up.
It doesn't completely hold up.
Thank you.
But my follow-up question is, do you own any art?
Yes, indeed.
And what is the art that you own, and why do you own it?
I own it because it captures my attention. It interrogates my understanding of what art is. Some of my favorite art is collage. Eduardo Paolozzi, my favorite British artist, in which he pulls pieces from popular culture and puts in the same pastiche a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger and the design of a factory gear, and he puts it all together and says, what kind of a world is it that produces all these different cultural products? How can you make sense of all these things all at once? I love art that yokes together violently different kinds of things and requires of the audience to make a coherent sense of it. Yes?
Okay, my name is Savannah Wood. I am a fine arts student at USC. And my question, I guess it's more of a statement. We were talking about LA Live, and you were saying how can we make it more public. And one thing about it is that every single time I drive by there, I've been there once, I try to avoid it because it's like a bombardment of media. And you said that you wanted to have more artists use the space, but I don't think there is space because you're talking about the lights and the media, and it's sort of overpowering. So I think that the only reason people come there is because they're going to spend money. So to make it more public, maybe to include green spaces in there somehow, so people can come there for another reason that isn't just to spend money, and that would give it back to people. That's just, I wouldn't go there because I don't want to spend money there. So if there were a green space where people could come and talk and interact in another way, maybe there would be other performances going on there, but if you sit down in front of a cafe, they're going to want you to come in and buy coffee. You know what I mean? Like, so there's not really a space where you can just be without having to pay.
A free space.
Right, free space. Exactly.
So randomly, Ted, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. No, touche. I mean,
Sure. Either way, if you want to keep. Okay.
I mean, I think it is a contradiction of sorts that we've made this space, and it is a sensory bombardment. There's no doubt about that, and that's quite intentional. We're trying to capture eyeballs, and that's important to our sponsors, and all those things are again, creating an income stream that pays for it. But I mean, I do think there are opportunities there, and maybe it's just the way that we need to engage our community of interest holders better to bring them more into the programming of that space. Let's face it, it is about programming, whether it's a farmer's market or a community festival or having the gay men's choir there, and we've done all these things. We're doing a holiday skating rink, which will have community skating lessons and things of that type. So you try to make it more public, but I think it's always doing this heavy lifting as a place that is about the red carpets for an award show, or the stream of fans queuing up or going to a club or an event there. So I think it's a great challenge, a great question, and I think it's something we as a company need to address.
So I was thinking about it, like, if I were to make art in this space, what would it be? What form would it take? And the only thing I could think about is just basically like taking that gigantic screen that's on Figueroa and putting something up there that totally subverts everything that whole place stands for, basically. Like, I don't mean to attack you personally.
It's okay. It's all right.
This place is like such a huge blemish on downtown for me, and I hate that it exists. I'm sorry.
Don't hold back.
But you should make that collage. You should make that. Go out there, take a photograph, and make that. What imagery could subvert
but I think
that?
it needs to be within that frame. You know what I mean? Like, if I take a photograph and put it in a gallery, then it's just...
No, I didn't say anything about putting it in a gallery. I said it's for you. It's for you to be able to work out your idea and to work out this artistic... I think this notion of what can you do to subvert and both express what you're talking about visually, I think that's a fantastic beginning. Try it. It might take you somewhere. Yeah?
Bring a urinal down there.
Yes.
No flush.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm going to go over here. Please.
Hi, I'm short. So my question is...
Say who you are.
Oh, I'm Julie, and I'm one of Professor Bray's students. Hi. And so my question would be, the Sonic Forest, the intended audience, did you reach them? Were you successful? And who was the intended audience? And were you successful in reaching them? Or I guess that would be my question. And then one more question. In general, I've heard the terms people, public space, and urban being thrown out there, and I'd like to know how any one of you defines the term urban, and maybe where do you live? Do you live in an urban space?
Okay, I'm sorry. So just tell me the first question again.
Your audience.
Your audience.
No, you asked me, it was a very...
Who
do I feel I reached an audience?
Yeah, who was your... Did you have an intended audience, and if you did you reach them?
No, I don't. And I don't, I mean, it's part of what it's about. It's free and open. It's accessible. It's an experiment. Every time I set it up, I've had it for 15 years. There's permanent installations. There's one in Zaragoza, Spain. There's one in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's a platform. It's a stage, and I love to just sit and watch what happens, and that's what it is for me. I mean, there is some aspect to it that I've created a structure that allows people, that gives people the opportunity to interact in certain ways. But, you know, people on bicycles, people on skateboards, especially here at USC, which, you know, I haven't seen a lot of that. That's a whole new sort of game for me. So I try to keep it very open.
Anyone want to take a quick take on urban, what that means?
Sir?
Well, I guess I'm going to relate that question to the notion of commercial versus public space. I think for a context as a urban context, it has to be first commercial before it became public. And that's actually the real vitality of a city. And take LA, for example. It's so strange to me. LA is actually not a commercial place. If you go through downtown, all the major towers, if you actually do a measurement of them, no ground floor or lobby level has any commercial activities more than 1/10 of the overall length. Has large security desk, couple chairs with public art. So it's not commercial to start with. How can it be public? Because public congregates in different forms. Congregates for commercial purposes. Each individual is actually the most public form. And then taking all the monument buildings, let's say Disney Hall, there's only probably 3 doors around the perimeter. That's the best building in the city. And then you take Caltran, no openings around the perimeter. So it's not a commercial city to start with. How can it be public? I think the contrast between Nokia and what actually offended you, it's too public. It is not commercial yet. So I think the first lesson for LA is to maximize its commercial ability and get rid of the lobbies and jammed all the shops in the noodle shops and coffee shops and everything to turn it into Hong Kong, for example. Turn it into Rome, for example. Really, the large footprint, if you take it, only 10% of it are actually used for commercial purposes. That's why they're not public. So the sidewalks doesn't have any people, and public art on the corner of the office never been public. So this is just a note for LA, and LA should catch up to be commercial before it became public.
Julie snuck in 2 questions, but I'm asking everybody else only to ask 1. Please.
My name is Jani, and I'm a multi-video technologist, and I'm working with Anne right now on a major public art installation that's being constructed at LAX as we speak. And there's been a lot of discussion tonight about what is good art, and I'd like to pose the idea that discussion's been going on since the first cave paintings were done, and the other guys at the cave looked down and said, well, so as a culture, we've developed people in our culture who are experts in art and criticize art and think a lot about art. And we also have artists who spend their life making art, and often the very best art is very personal art. So my question for all of the panel members is, first of all...
Just one.
My question is, do you think there are challenges to be met in terms of bridging the gaps between architects, engineers, public art administrators, curators, to make more large-scale public art projects possible?
Who's going to pick that up? Anyone? No one's going to disagree that there are challenges. Does anyone want to talk about a challenge?
We can talk about the LAX project, and it's extremely difficult getting all the languages between that we have like a string of people. So an artist says, I don't want to do that. They tell me, I tell the administrator tells, the engineer that tells the architect. And I don't know the communication, how it finally makes it to the architect. It's very complicated.
Let's see how quickly we can get a few more questions in. Yes?
He was next.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Thanks. My name is Andrew Goldman. I'm a recent graduate from USC, which is piano and neuroscience. I have a question.
Piano, neuroscience, architecture, music. There's a trend.
The discussion of art tonight has largely been focusing on the functional role of art in society and how people interact with art and the role that it plays. I'd like to ask the panel further comments on art from a different perspective, which is what is aesthetics, and what makes it aesthetics, and what makes a particular piece of art beautiful, or what makes it intuitively enjoyable.
What one person would like to take that on?
Well, I had said earlier about social, political, and cultural conditions when the work of art is created has a great deal of effect on its content and its context, and for me, whether it has a certain resonance. So And so I think that is how I would answer your question about aesthetics. That it's not, to me, there's not an absolute by any stretch, and that Andy Warhol's Brillo box done today wouldn't have any significance. But at the time, with its relationship to what was going on in terms of the commercial world and commercial art in the world and other things that were happening at that time, is what, to me, gives it the significance that it has. It's a marker, it's a visual marker of a certain time in our culture about what was happening.
One of the nice things about what's going to happen after this to raise our blood sugar is the chance to continue the conversation with everyone who's here. Yes?
Hi, my name is Scott Kleinrock. I'm a landscape designer. Different forms of public space have been mentioned today, from a shopping mall as a place for public art to an area outside of a city hall to a corporate plaza. There's very different issues of control in those areas. Who's invited to participate, who can be removed for doing things that aren't against the law. I was wondering if anyone would like to talk about sort of the difference of public art, and if there's any significant differences in whether it happens in a truly public place or a semi-public place where there's different control issues.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. I think the idea of bringing public art to a place, whether it's a temporary installation, and I know Chris has long worked at the idea of bringing some of his art pieces out to our festival in Coachella. In that way, it's experienced by the greatest public you can imagine. I think when it comes down to the city, yes, we have all kinds of things we need to worry about. So whether it's emergency access lanes or notions of what's public space, what's private space, where does my demising line for that outdoor seating area end or begin? So I think when it comes to art, I think it's really how do you envision that space in a more holistic way, and whether it's playing for change and tying together cities around the world with song makers on a video that are almost talking to one another. Those are things that we can do in that space. It's very public.
That's just a taste of the longer answer you're going to be getting upstairs. I think we just have time for two last questions. Could we maybe just hear all three questions? What's your question? Let's have all three questions said quickly.
Okay, I'm Gregory Wright. I'm an independent conceptual artist and a collage artist, I might add. And my question is, in the spirit and context of virtual space, public space, and creative participatory interaction, is there any online space, place, or process where any creative individual, for example myself, can share their specific project visions, one or more, for public spaces in a way that might help move that vision, that concept closer to reality, especially for people who are not ensconced in the industry as well as they might be.
Great. Hold that thought. Your question.
Yeah, I have a question about this is a creative process. Like we said about the subway system, taking public space, but just with the mood of a space, the stressful environment, and taking that and applying to art, that kind of like taking what, a urinal, the utility of the urinal is boring, and kind of turning that on its head. So I was wondering if, I know he also has a piece in the Miami airport, and that, do you have the space to dictate, for lack of a better word, dictate what your work is going to be, or did you think of your art first and thought that was a good place to place it in terms of changing the mood?
And you are?
I'm a student here, music industry.
And your question?
My name is Kenny Raven. I'm a music major, and my question is, Chris, you mentioned the Bolshevik revolution earlier, and how art was really pivotal in forming that movement. Do you think in our society today, despite like media and entertainment bombardment, that a sort of modern public art revolution is possible?
So the first question about an online space for independent artists to be part of the discussion in a way in which boundaries are shrunk. Anybody have one to propose that they know of?
Is there
Is it going to be your Facebook page, Chris?
No, I think it's more about are there any local organizations? You know, I mean, there's Creative Time in New York. I mean, there's places that you can write to, but is there anyone in
So you're going to find out after we break what some of these places are. And Tris, these last two questions were both for you, and because you know how good the dessert is, you're going to answer them really compactly.
Yes. Oh, well, no. I got to start with the last one first because my memory is shot.
Public art and revolution.
Bolshevik revolution. My answer would be Shepard. Go study Shepard Fairey and Banksy, which are two artists who work in the public realm, do big, stencils, and really, if you know about Shepard Fairey and what he's got.
Shepard Fairey is doing one of the next Visions and Voices here.
And Luke, what was it?
Public space dictating your art, or do you come up with the idea first and find a place?
Yeah. There's no one answer. Sometimes the public, there are ideas, there's plenty of ideas in my head, and a commission comes along to do a thing in a certain space, and I try to think about whether or not it would work in this space and how I might modify it so it might work better in this space. There's always an initial vision, but definitely the space has to have some effect in terms of the actual physical manifestation.
So Rainbow Walkway, you were kind of like walking in the airport?
No. Rainbow Walkway is a piece that wasn't in Miami Airport. It was taken out after 2001. But Harmonic Runway, it's called, and was a 200-foot long walkway that had 132 sheets of colored glass. The metaphor in my mind was like walking through a rainbow. And that's an idea I've had since I was about 6 years old. Okay? And I finally got a shot. Because in 1995, not only was the competition, but Monsanto Corporation, up until that time, there were only 6 colors of transparent colored glass. And they developed a process that made me have a color line of 1,000 different colors. So I actually went to them and said, hey, I've got a project that would really promote your new color line. And so they actually gave me all the color system. But I had to wait for the technology to be developed in order to have this 6-year-old vision come into reality. And then I had 2001 take it away.
For those here who came because they wanted their brains stimulated, for those who came because art and passion and feelings are the same, and for those who just wanted to be entertained, I hope you had as good a time as I did. Please thank the panel.